Rings of fire for days, chaos bolts to destroy single target. That's what distraction does. One of the best, if not the best, single target spec of this season. And you can play your Destro Warlock really nice, really easy, really quick with our Destro Warlock guide that you're actually watching right now, because that's why you're here. So make sure to follow through all the little things that we're about to give to you, little nuggets of information and tips and tricks and all of that. And also don't forget that this content is sponsored by our Patreon. So if you like seeing spec guides and you want to see yours done eventually as well, if let's say Destro's maybe not your cup of tea, then consider becoming a patron. It definitely helps us make more of these videos out. The patrons are big supporters of class guides. That pretty much one of the main reasons is why we have them back as well, is because you guys asked a lot for it. So yes, we do listen, and we are super humbled by all of the support that you guys are giving us. We couldn't be doing this without you, so thank you very much for supporting the content and making this possible. Check the Patreon link down in the description. You'll see a couple of tiers depending on what you want specifically, because we have some goodies ready for you, and we would be super grateful. Now let's check the talents. But before we go into the talents, keep in mind that all the builds that we will showcase here will be linked in the description, so you can just import them into your own game. We will talk about a couple of talents here and there to kind of round up the builds and the mindset between them, but you will be able to just simply copy them into your game by the links in the description. Now also, another thing to mention is that the builds that we're going to be talking about are basically your Aberrus tier set builds, meaning that you will have channel Demon Fire into them, which is maybe the contentious part of Destro Warlock in this season. We will assume that you guys have the tier set, or at least working towards the tier set to actually get it. If not, you can probably just play Destruction as you played it in the last season. But just that, a little bit of a disclaimer. Now, going into the builds, first we're going to talk about the single target, the raiding build, essentially, where you go for Pandemonium as you build down, because Pandemonium is the shortest and most efficient way towards Backlash. A very strong talent that you definitely want, instead of just putting 2 points into improved Immolate. On top of this, you'll get the Immolate extension effect from Raging Demon Fire by channeling Demon Fire as well. Channel Demon Fire. So you're gonna have a pretty decent uptime, at least in single target. Further down the tree, you pick Scalding Flames, increasing your Immolate damage. Ashen Remains is also really good to buff the damage to targets affected by Immolate. Eradication to buff the damage that you do through Chaos Bolts as your main single target spender, and sometimes with Cleave, but we'll get to that. Burnt Ash is also another big single target pumper, where it buffs the strength of your Incinerate, your generator, by a crap ton after you use a Chaos Bolt. And it will start to hit sometimes even stronger than actual Chaos Bolts if they crit, which is a little bit nutty, but hey, that's Destro Warlock for you in the second season. And speaking of the 2-target cleave, the quintessential biggest uptake on Destruction, although its single target is probably one of the best in the game as well, is through the second target cleave with Havoc, making your Chaos Bolts melt. You won't change too many things, but you will spec out of Scalding Flames and instead put 2 points into Rolling Havoc, buffing your damage every time a spell gets duplicated by Havoc, which is going to happen quite a bit on a bunch of fights in this raid. I think we have 1, 2 maybe bosses that are just pure single target, and every other boss has some form of as that you can cleave off of, which is really good. And once you move from raiding and into actual pure AoE, I'm talking about Assault in the actual raid maybe, and Mythic Plus, of course, you'll change a bunch more stuff. First of all, you will take points out of Explosive Potential, Scalding Flames, and Burnt Ashes, and instead place them into Rain of Fire, the AoE spender, Pyrogenics, buffing your fire damage, and Inferno, the talent that makes your Rain of Fire spammy, until the tank kites things out. And that's when we cry. But why? My damage. Playing Demonology. The last 2 available points will be put into Power Overwhelming, where you will buff your Mastery, and you'll have 1 extra point to put as the second point into Master Ritualist for that Blasphemy synergy, making it so good in AoE. Very good, the best. All of the Infernals, please give them all out. Now, the class talent tree have some flexibility to them as well, based on the content you want to do and what you actually aim for. You can go for more survivability, or you can go for more utility, depending on the group, depending on what you need. You have stuff like Fail Synergy and Profane Bargain, which are going to be really good, but you can also swap around between Banish, Fiendish Stride, and Dark Fury, depending exactly, once again, on what your comp needs. Keep in mind, once again, that all of these builds are linked down in the description, and you can just quickly import them ASAP, so you can have the right talents. As far as stats and enchants and consumables and all of that good stuff, the best thing you'll probably always do is sim yourself. Yes, sim. Some of them are better than others, but the only real 100% answer correct for all situations is to sim on raidboss.com, where you can actually find out exactly what the best thing for you is. However, if you cannot be bothered doing third-party apps, we all know it's a little bit annoying. I don't want to get out of WoW to kind of figure out exactly what item to put on my character, and in that case, what you want to make sure is that intellect is your best stat, aka highest eye level on gear that actually has intellect. Not all gear pieces have intellect, by the way, is going to be the most important thing that you put on your character, followed by haste and mastery, the quintessential best stats for destruction for ages, well, last couple of patches anyway, but actually crit is actually very close to mastery, but versatility will still be the lowest thing in your priority list. As for the enchants that you're going to be using, for your weapon, get Sophic Devotion, on your cloak, get a Graceful Avoidance, for the chest, Waking Stats, bracers will have Devotion of Avoidance, legs, Frozen Spell Thread, boots, Plains Runner's Breeze, and rings, Devotion of Haste. A lot of haste stuff, because, you know, it makes sense, because those are the stats, man. Your sockets will be pretty self-explanatory if you've played any amount of Dragonflight so far. One of the gems will be Fiercely Limited Diamond, which gives you primary stats and haste. You can only have one of them, so you might as well get one. But the other parts will be filled up with Quick Ephemeral for pure haste, or Keen Ephemeral if you want to get haste and mastery. More haste than mastery, because haste is king. And last but not least, the food, because you need to eat food so to stay alive. Feasts are obviously going to give you the best amount of stats, but you can also take fortune cookies or deviously deviled eggs. We kind of recommend deviously deviled eggs if you cannot get feasts, because fortune cookies cannot be ate in Mythic Plus dungeons, since the game sees them as generating items in your backpacks, because you get, you know, the actual fortune, and it prevents you from eating a second fortune cookie if you've ate just before the key started. Deviously deviled eggs, everybody. The alchemical needs will see your files of elemental chaos as being the supreme buffers for you if you can maintain a pretty good uptime on the buff. However, tepid versatility is more an all-around option, giving you damage and also giving you versatility, which is going to give you tankiness, because versatility, we all know that. And for your potion of choice, Elemental Potion of Ultimate Power is the best one. It gives you the most amount of intellect, and that's really what you care about at the end of the day. And to close it off, the ultimate min-maxers cannot be satisfied without the actual rune, Howling Rune for your weapon, which is a 2-hour consumable that you put on your weapon and you get haste procs. Haste is good. It's good for you. It's good for your damage and your overall. In terms of your gear, obviously crafted gear has made a resurgence into Dragonflight, and you will want to keep your eyes up for this because the embellishments are really good. Specifically, Shadow Flame Tempered Armor Patch, and you want 2 of these, are going to be your ideal to get on your crafted gear. We recommend you put them on the belt and bracers since they don't take tier slots, and you'll be able to get your 4th and then maybe even 5 set a little bit easier. And you'll also have an option to add a socket to them in the future, which is good because sockets are also a very good source of power. The best weapon that you can get is most likely Erethos, the Empty Promise from Sarkareth, since it drops at a highest eye level depending on the content that you end up clearing. An alternative is Infinite Dragonspire from Uldaman, or there's an option for the Primal Molten Spellblade as the crafted weapon with the Offhand Rod of Perfect Order from Halls of Infusion, or basically any highest item level from any of these, probably except the crafted gear, that you can find from your weekly vault. The 2 best trinkets that you will want on your Destro Warlock are from the raid, but again, we still recommend that you sim your character in order to see exactly what works best with your current gear and, you know, setup. Ominous Chromatic Essence is really good. It gives you a passive intellect buff and a secondary stat that you choose, plus a buff from other people in your group or raid if they're using different secondary stats. While the second one would be the Vessel of Searing Shadow from the Amalgamation Chamber, pretty early into the raid, so you can have a fairly easy time in farming this every week, or if you're lucky on the vault. Alternatively, if you don't raid or if you cannot be bothered to farm those, in Mythic Plus you have the Iridis Fragment, which drops from Halls of Infusion, and it has a Giga Intellect buff, decaying with more spells that you press. So pop your big spells right after you pop this bad boy. One honorable mention that we wanted to point out: if you've raided in Vault of the Incarnate and you still have Seal of Diurna's Chosen and you haven't gotten rid of it yet, it's probably going to be one of your better rings out there because it does proc with the fire damage, so keep that in mind. We still recommend that you sim it before you replace it, or if you replace it. We mentioned this at the beginning of the talent tree, but the tier set does actually alter your talent setup. The two set that you'll end up picking will make you want to talent into Channel Demon Fire because the actual bolts that you channel, Immolate and Incinerate, will have an extra chance to fire an additional bolt that deals 50% more damage to the main target, while the Force It makes each of your bolts increase your fire damage by 1%, stacking up to 8% for 13 seconds. So in between your Channel Demon Fire windows, your 2-set procs can also give you this buff. However, they will not refresh the buff duration, but as soon as you cast Channel Demon Fire again, your buff will reset. So basically, any actual cast of the Channel Demon Fire spell, you will gain 8 stacks of the fire damage increase buff. And given that Channel Demon Fire cooldown is reduced by haste, you will be able to keep this up pretty well for a long time. And finally, we get into the rotation, the meat and the potatoes of your spec in terms of destruction at the very least. And the rotation can definitely change depending on your talent setup, but we will keep the rotation based on the talents that we recommend, since otherwise we will spend the whole day here telling you different styles of openers and so on and so forth. Speaking of, for the single target, you'll start with pre-casting Incinerate when there are 3 seconds left on the pool timer. You after that follow it up by a quick Immolate and then summon your Infernal. After that, you will use any unused trinkets and DPS potions. Pop your Conflagrate to generate backdraft stacks and then use these stacks on Chaos Bolts. You will keep up Chaos Bolts to maintain Eradication and make sure that you use Chaos Bolts so you don't cap on Soul Shard. As soon as it's available, channel the Demon Fire and then fill your rotation with Incinerate. And if you are fighting a cleave situation where there are 2 targets, the opener is the exact same with the exception that you will add your Havoc on a secondary target after you have popped your trinkets and your DPS potions, and then continue doing the exact same thing on your main target. Keep in mind that when you're using the Madness of the Azure Kirtan, which you should be using it, you want to cast as many Chaos Bolts as possible to maintain the uptime. The way this buff works is that once you cast the Chaos Bolt in single target at the very least, you'll have a certain amount of time where the next Chaos Bolt, if cast within this window of the buff, will also get a big increase in damage. It doesn't matter when the buff expires, it matters if the cast of your Chaos Bolt finishes by the time the buff runs out. You probably don't want to cast Chaos Bolts back to back, but depending on your level of haste, you can fill in each Chaos Bolt cast with an Incinerate in between, or a Conflagrate. And speaking of the single target priority, what do you do when you're outside of your cooldowns or when the fight is just rolling as normal? Well, the most important thing that you need to keep in mind is you want to keep Immolate up at all times, followed by making sure you never cap on Soul Shards by casting your Chaos Bolts. And of course, when you channel your Demon Fire, make sure that you channel it during the Roaring Blaze window, aka after you've pressed your Conflagrate, to get the most amount of damage out of it. Use Conflagrate if you have 2 charges, so you don't cap on it, ideally too much, to hasten the long casts of your spells, specifically Chaos Bolt. You'll also want to make sure to cast Chaos Bolt to maintain the Eradication debuff. Next is to keep Conflagrate up to generate Soul Shards and fill in with Incinerates in your downtime. As for the 2-target cleave, the priority is the same. The only thing that you do different is after you've put Immolate up on the second target as well, you pop your Havoc and then continue with your normal rotation. As far as the AoE priority goes, when you're in the meat, the thick of things, what you want to do in AoE is you want to maintain Immolate up on your main target as the most important thing. The second most important thing is to use Rain of Fire if you have more than 5 targets out, or if Havoc is on cooldown, use Rain of Fire on 3 or more targets. If you're fighting fewer than 3 targets, the next thing that you want to do is cast Chaos Bolt to prevent you reaching 5 Soul Shards and capping on Soul Shards. If Havoc is available, press Havoc on a secondary target. Use Channel Demon Fire whenever it is available, then you cast Chaos Bolt to spend Soul Shards, Conflagrate to generate Soul Shards, and the backdraft stacks to get faster casts out, and fill in with Incinerate. Now, the ideal of it is that your priority changes depending on how many targets are up. And if you're fighting 1 to 2 targets, you still use Chaos Bolt as your consumer. If you're fighting more than 2 targets, let's say 3 to 4, and your Havoc is available, you will still use Chaos Bolt to cleave since it will do more damage than Rain of Fire, and you'll always use Chaos Bolt if the tank is prepared to move the pack away out of your Rain of Fire, since you will just lose damage that way. However, if Havoc is on cooldown, you will use Rain of Fire on 3 or more targets, and you will always use Rain of Fire if there are 5 or more targets out, period. And this is kind of how you want to think about Rain of Fire and Chaos Bolt in AoE. These are the main things that you want to keep in mind for Destruction going into Season 2, but there are a couple of tips that we would like to make it easier for you to deal more damage and enjoy this awesome spec. Destruction Warlocks work by building soul shards and spending them to do big damage. Pretty self-explanatory. Your main soul shard generators are Conflagrate, Immolate, Incinerate, but also some others which are not used at the moment, aka Soulfire, Shadow Burn, Fire and Brimstone, which is a passive, and so on and so forth. The shard spenders are Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire, period, and we talked about them when you use each individual one. The baseline of doing good DPS as a Destruction Warlock is to keep an eye on your soul shards and not overcap them. Keep an eye on your Madness of Azhakir, like I mentioned earlier, Eradication, Burnt Ashes, and Roaring Blaze, and react accordingly to consume these procs and get the most out of your kit. The tier set forces you into speccing and using Channel Demon Fire, so keep your eyes open on the buff from this as well. It definitely helps out in maintaining your damage, and try to push your spenders into the windows when this buff is up. As for your demon pet choice, Imps and Fellhounds have the same amount of damage output, and you should choose between them depending on their utility. Likely you'll use Fellhounds more for the interrupt. The Imp provides a magical dispel on a friendly target. The Imp is also ranged, and it doesn't suffer from having to move from target to target, so in situations where, let's say you're fighting the Amalgamation Chamber in the Abyss raid where the bosses keep swapping positions, the Imp is probably better there because it can maintain uptime on shooting its little Fell Firebolts on the target instead of having the Fellhound run from A to B consistently. The actual best pet for pure single target damage at the moment is the Syad, or the old Succubus, which can stack Whiplash on the boss, increasing the damage it takes from your demon. But this is only an increase if the debuff has high uptime and you don't lose out on a utility option that you need, where you would need a Dispel or an Interrupt, for example. The Voidwalker has some very minor AoE DPS increase, but it's generally not worth losing a Euro utility over it. And with this, we've concluded everything that you need to know about Destruction. Obviously, you can go more in depth with Destruction if you check the Council of the Black Harvest Discord, where you'll find a lot of information there and a lot of content creators that do a lot of cool stuff for Destruction, like Kalamazi, who's my personal favorite, that does a lot of videos on everything Warlock consistently if you want to improve yourself as a Warlock and kind of know exactly everything that goes around in the Warlock world. Thank you, Patreons, once again for supporting the content. Love you guys. You make this possible. Thank you for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.